Hello, today I'm going to demonstrate my little Android application called LANDesk Support Tools. LANDesk Support Tools is an integration to LANDesk Management Suite software. LANDesk Management Suite software is the idea of a server that controls workstations. Think of a company that has 5,000 workstations. They want a single server that they can control and manage those workstations and know everything about those workstations. That's what LANDesk Management Suite does. This little plugin allows us to connect to a LANDesk Management Suite core. And as you can see, we put in the core server name. This can be a name or an IP address, a username, a password, the domain. Click connect, and it's going to connect to that core server and bring back and there's going to be a list of functions we can do. There's quite a list of functions that can be done on the core server. For this example, we've just picked 3 of them. This shows you the configurations, which is the actual what you're going to install on the agent, and the names of the actual configurations. So you can push out this to different computers. If you have 5,000 computers, you might have a marketing department and they might need to be managed in one way, and you have a sales department that needs to be managed in another, and a support department that needs to be managed in another. You can create different management configurations for them. And then this core server is a demo core and only has 3 devices it's managing. And we have these 3 devices mostly just to show that we can manage Windows, Linux, and Mac, and we can manage all these devices. These 2 devices are not up and running at the moment, and this device is up and running. We can click on this device and gather information from the core server. This is not real-time information. This is information that the device has sent to the LANDesk Core server, and I have pulled this information using a web service connecting to the core server. Once here, we don't know the status of an agent. We actually have this ping button we can hit, which will connect to the agent service and tell us if the service is running, which we could do by default. I just didn't set it up to do it by default. We also can query devices. You think of if someone has 5,000 computers. Well, I only had 3, and it's really easy to see 3 here. Now, of course, I can come in here and type in a few of these, and interesting, that's a bug where when there's only one showing, it takes the top icon. It should have maintained the same icon, but it didn't. That is interesting. There's only 3 computers here. If you had 5,000 computers, this would take a long time to populate, and you probably wouldn't want to go in and look at all 5,000 at a time. Chances are you're only going to work on a subset of computers. You can create queries. I've created these 3 queries. These are not there by default. By default, you have no queries on a management suite server. And again, this isn't a customer server. This is my lab server. So I went in and created 3 quick queries. This will show me all my Mac devices, and since there's only one Mac device, that's the one that'll show up. And same with Linux. And every time I click on this, I'm actually connecting to a web service on the core server, running the query. It's returning a list of devices and displaying those devices to me. And each one of these queries, that happens, which is why it takes so long. And even from here, there's some code reuse. This screen is says all devices. I probably could give it a better name, but I wanted to leave that as all devices for now, because I wanted to show how we were reusing the same screen, so we didn't have to write the code twice. We have the same go to device properties option. It's the same screen here as it is if we go to device queries and go to a specific device. So our total implementation for this project is we have a connection page. the ability to connect, and to connect is a background process. And we can fail to connect. So if our credentials are, let's say, incorrect, and I come down I click connect, it'll pop up a little toast saying connection failed because I used the wrong username. So we do have a nice little toast there. This connection again happens in a background worker process. We're going to show you the code here in just a minute. This list I have implemented statically. There's not really a dynamic way to get the features that you could do on a core. But I can look at the agent configurations. This list is coming from the core server. I hit a web service on a core, gathered an XML which contained the list of strings, and that was returned back to me. Same thing when I hit all devices. I ask the core server for a list of all devices. It returns that back to me in an XML. And the same thing when I hit device queries, I get a list of these queries returned to me in an XML, and I'm consuming them and displaying them. Actually, these, even though these come back over the web in XML, they are coming in as objects from the web service reference. And the other implementation I've already shown. The other implementation I've already shown is the ability to ping. So, well, first I also, this data was returned to me for each device, and now I'm just pulling that up and displaying it. I used a table layout mostly because I wanted to have these all line up perfectly. I was able to wrap the text, and also I was able to display, based on the OS, a different image, and then I'm also able to establish a second connection. This one happens a little different. This actually connects to this client real time and tells me the status of the agent on that client real time. So everything else has been, I've been talking to the server, the core server, asking, what has the client told you lately? So it's all static data stored in a database on the core, but this connection's live. I go hit this client using its IP directly and query whether the agent is running on that box right now or not. The machine could be turned off and not available at the time, and this tells me whether it is. So that's the total list of features I've implemented. There's a million other management suite features that could be implemented. Now we're going to go talk about the code. Okay, here we're able to develop in Microsoft Visual Studio. Your other option for developing Android apps using C# is a tool called MonoDevelop. There's a reason I wrote this application in C#. This application was written in C# because the web service that I connect to is using NTLM integrated authentication, and to get Android and Java to connect, it started out I needed to access this library, then another library, then another library, and before everything was said and done, I had a whole bunch of libraries and kind of a mess and still was unable to connect. Whereas with C#, connecting to a web service using integrated authentication is just standard, easy. So I converted my entire Java project over to C#. In order to do this on C#, we use a tool called, or a software library called Monodroid. Monodroid was originally being developed by Novell, and when Novell collapsed and broke into pieces, it became the Monodroid portion of it which includes Mono Touch, which is a Macintosh or an iOS version as well, all became part of a company called Xamarin. Let's go to their homepage real quick. Alright, here we have Xamarin's homepage. You can build cross-platform mobile apps using C# and .NET. You can do this for Android or for iOS. I, of course, chose Android. You can come to the documentation and get the Mono for Android documentation, which will explain how to install Mono for Android, how to write your first activity. A lot of the code is almost copy and paste from Java to C#. Java and C# are different enough that it won't compile right away, but they're the same enough that some of the code, the only change was in Java, the first letter of a function usually is lowercase. In C#, the first letter is usually uppercase, and a lot of times that was all that was needed. One of the other differences is a property. Java uses getters and setters like get layout, set layout, whereas C# has the idea of a property that just implements a get or set behind the scene. I'll show you some examples of that. But here in Xamarin, you can go through, get the documentation, walk through various views and controls. A lot of it is almost identical to what you'd be developing in Java. We're going to go ahead and go back to the code, and I'm going to show you that's the case. So just like in Java, your first object is an activity. It's the same in MonoDroid. One of the big differences is I'm writing in Visual Studio instead of Eclipse. Let's pull up an activity, and we will go ahead and take a look at this. Let's make this a little bit bigger so we can see what's going on here. Alright. Okay, so we have a namespace. This is similar to your package name in Java. And usings are almost equivalent to imports in Java. Now, they have taken a little bit of the work for you, and they are generating an Android manifest a little bit based on this tag. So this is be my main launcher, so it's the one that's going to open in your Java application. You're going to go configure that in your Android manifest, but I can do that right here. Just like in Java, your object extends activity or list activity. Here we're doing the same thing. The colon is the same as the word extends. There is no word implements, but just like you would implement an interface, you could have colon activity, comma, and an interface if you wanted. Just like in Java, you override the onCreate method. Once again, if you look at this, in Java it's lowercase onCreate, in C# it's uppercase onCreate, and the override is actually in the actual declaration of the function instead of in an @ sign above it. We call base.onCreate instead of super onCreate, very similar. We set our content view with an uppercase S. And I am storing the username and password. So what that means is this information here on open and close is being stored, everything but the password, so that you don't have to type it in every time. That can get obnoxious. And that's what this store object is, and I'm going to use save settings if they exist. And very similar in Java, you can find a button using find view by ID. This syntax is a little different, and in Java the term delegate doesn't exist, but in Java you can just add button click and you can put your function right in, similar to how you do in C# a delegate. So this shouldn't be too confusing for those of you writing Android apps in Java to understand. And this is what's going to happen when we click our button. We're going to disable the button so that you can't click it multiple times. We don't want to allow people to try to authenticate multiple times. Then we're going to get the credentials from the UI, and that's really easy. We just read each of our edit texts and we assign them to our core object. Remember, we're connecting to a core server, so when I say core object, this guy is an object representing the core server. And he's got an initialize services function, and if we are able to initialize server, we have connected. If not, we'll show an error. And then once we've initialized the services, we'll go ahead and see if it's configured. Actually, let me take that back. This initialize services is initializing an object required to check if we have authenticated. So this is an object initialization. Sorry, this isn't doing the actual authentication to the core yet, just initializing the object, the services object that will connect to the core. And assuming that everything is configured and everything initializes, this is configured, returns true. If all the items in the core have been initialized, it'll return false. Basically, if you haven't filled out the password or you haven't filled out the user or core, then at that point that is configured will return false and it won't try to connect. And the initialized services will probably fail and you'll get this error, and then this, you won't actually run your background worker, your background thread. So here we're going to call a background thread. I use threadpool.queueUser work item just as an example. Elsewhere in the program I'm going to use background worker. I probably, if I release this app for my company LANDesk, would replace this with background worker. I don't see any benefit of creating a whole thread pool for one thread. So we get the credentials from the UI. We do thread work down here, which we have a message-based SDK, which is our web service. And we've referenced the web service. Adding a reference to a web service is easy as going here and clicking add web reference. And you put in the URL of the core server, and you go ahead and you finish this. Obviously I've already done it, so I don't need to do it again. So I'll go ahead and close this window, click cancel. I've already added this web reference. I did have to make a change to the web reference. By default, the web reference comes from one IP address and connects to one IP address. Obviously I'm writing something that any customer would connect to the IP address of their core, so the IP address is going to change. I was able to go in here and I made a slight change to one object in here, so instead of having a static IP, it takes the IP address in, which we're getting that IP address from the edit text right here. This guy, whatever IP address you type in, that's the server we're going to hit and use the web references of. So this services.whoami will connect to the core. There are other ways to check rights. For now I'm doing this. It might be a future thing where I go in and I find out the best practices for making sure that we have all the rights and that we're in the right groups. And assuming that we're able to do this, that means we have officially authenticated to the MBSDK and can do some work. So we'll run on UI thread is a function that will call back to the UI thread to do something. Since we're in a background thread, we can't actually update the UI thread from the background thread unless we use this run on UI thread option. So run on UI thread takes a action object. An action object can just be a function, and this might be a little bit of confusing C# code for those of you who are Java only, but it's basically saying give me a function and here's the function. So down here I have show error, which will throw up a toast, connection failed. Otherwise, if I succeed and I establish a connection, I'm going to go to the next screen where I'm going to where I'm going to re-enable my button just in case I want to go back, and then I'm going to start my next activity. So that's what happens when we come here. We click connect, the button disables, and we go back. Now the reason I left the button, I re-enabled the button, is I could come back here and maybe I want to connect to a different core. So I need the ability for this button to be re-enabled so that I can continue on again if I go back. Alright, let's go back to the C# code and let's look at all the let's talk a little bit more about this library. We have the core authentication activity. The second window is the management tools list activity. That is this window here. This is the management tools list activity. And let's bring this over here, and we will walk through this while we look at the screens. Here's my management tool list activity. I have an agent configuration activity, which is just it goes and gets the list of agent configurations, and you go back, I have all devices, which brings me to this activity, and this activity uses the device array adapter, and the device array adapter is what goes through. Let me make sure you can see this. I don't know if you can. It might have been cut off the screen just a little bit. It goes and connects to this device array adapter, which actually has code to display the correct image based on the type of device. And so this device is a Windows device. This device, sorry, I guess I shouldn't click on it. This device is a Linux device, a Mac device, and the image. So if we go look at this array adapter, it comes through, a lot of it's the same. We're implementing array adapter string, and we're passing in a device list, and the device list is not a string, but I have this names function that gives me an array of strings for each device, and so I pass to the base class just that string list. And in here I can go ahead and get a different view, and here I set the image, set image based on whether it's a Windows, Mac, or Linux device. Now the next screen you will see is the device properties screen. Here we have our device properties activity. This is the basic XML of a device, and this is given to me in an object, so I don't actually have to serialize and deserialize that. That's all happening through the MBSDK and the web reference code, so I didn't have to go and do that work, which was just great for me. C# gave it to me all for free. But here I'm still listing the activity, and then I actually pass from, on our device list, when I click a device, then I come down here on item click. So let's go look at that. I am here. I'm going to go ahead and click on a device, and that's going to call code to display all this. I'm passing this data through. I don't know if this is a limitation of MonoDroid. I'm pretty sure that I could pass just any object and put extra. I was unable to pass in C# the device list object, or the actual device. I guess I would have only passed this device. I wanted to pass this device on to the next screen, and I couldn't really do that. So what I did is I looped through all of its properties and passed every property over into the put extra. And then in the device properties activity, I go and I get intent.extras get string device. These are all the names of the properties, and I go ahead and I get all of those. And I assign them to the appropriate text fields over here. And then I also implemented the ability to LD ping the device, and this is one of the great things about using Mono and C# is I already had this code written for a previous project called LD ping. What LD ping does is, I think I've explained it already, it actually connects to the client and hits the service and tells me the status of the service. So I click and it will tell me that the service is running. So it's physically going out on the wire, connecting to 10.16.228.199 on port 9595, and it's getting some data back. One of the other features, if let's say you have two machines and one has an IP address but he shuts down, and the second machine boots up, and the DHCP server was running short on addresses, so it gave the new guy that booted up the address of the guy that just shut down. Well, if I hit this 10.16.228.199, well, it's the new machine that just booted up. So he's going to return back a different name, and I would show that. I don't have an example. I should have put in a second machine in the database that used the same IP so that I could demonstrate that. But it would have responded and said response received from a different machine or something to that effect. I think I have in the code exactly that status. Yeah, incorrect device responded, and then I put in the device name. I guess I could put something in if the connection doesn't happen at all. Right now it just says status unknown until you click. If you click and it can't connect, it stays status unknown. I could put something like can't connect in there, but I didn't do that for this project. Like I said, there's hundreds of things you can do with the LANDesk management suite and the MBSDK. I couldn't do it all at once. And then I have a queries list, which is very simple. It implements the list of queries, which also talks to the LANDesk MBSDK, gets a list of queries, and then it pulls back the same in the same way that the device list activity brings the list of devices. It's going to list machines, and right here we're using this same all devices object. If I pass in a get extra, if I put some extra data into the intent and I give it a query name, then I'm going to come here and I'm going to call list machines from my web service with the query name. If I don't give it a query name, I'm just going to get all machines. And so that's how query list activity and management tools activity both can hit the device list activity. One hits it showing all devices, one hits it using a query to query for only specific devices we want. And that is my code. A lot of the layout's done exactly the same as Java. There's no difference. So here's an image text view. We can make this a little as wide as we need to see, but as you can see, it's just like in Java. You have your linear layout image view. I copied and pasted this straight from Java. In fact, I used Java to build the UI, because Java has a GUI, kind of a rapid application development GUI for making an Android app, and Visual Studio and Monodroid haven't implemented that yet. So I went and designed my UI in Java on Eclipse, and then I just copied and pasted these objects over. Of course, I do a lot of manipulation in XML as well. I'm actually not using this LD ping view, but I have a core authentication view, The next view is the management tools view, and then the image text view is anytime I have a list that has an image on the left and text on the right. They all use the same view. Any objects that are just a list, such as the queries, a list of queries that doesn't have an image, it's the text large list view. So I don't have a view for each one of these because some of these reuse the other views. Device properties has its own view where I have a table row, which had some, I used the table row, maybe there's a better way to do it. It had kinds of some intricacies that I had to learn, such as you need to set the layout width to 0, otherwise it chooses the default width and it just can expand greater than the screen, and you get, even though I was wrapping, it was cutting off data, which was kind of interesting, but it said this was a problem, and so this has nothing to do with mono. I found the solution in a Java, a blog that was talking about developing for Android and Java, but it worked the same in mono, writing in C#. You have a strings XML just like you do in C#. Here are a lot of my strings. I wasn't localizing this app yet, so I didn't make a huge effort to use all localized strings. I never got around to doing a spinner. I was gonna have a spinner. What a spinner means is kind of like a little progress bar where a different one of these grays out and it goes around while I was authenticating to the core, while I was pinging a device. I didn't get that done. It wasn't really part of my project, so I didn't have to anyway, but I was trying to make an attempt to do a ping animation. And so just like, as you notice, it's got drawable, layout, and values. Your Android manifest is up here, and I'm using so I had it set to use permission internet, and I had a custom Android or a custom manifest. Turns out that MonoDroid gives you this permission by default, and I commented out just to test that was true, and sure enough, even with all of this commented out, I'm able to access network, and so this permission appears to be given to you by default just by using MonoDroid. So the only way to not have this permission is to explicitly deny it, which is a different method, and you can actually do this through some properties. They have a whole Android manifest and all your required permissions, and you can go through and scroll up and down these and configure or not configure a whole bunch of permissions. So that's kind of a cool little integration that they have that I didn't see in Eclipse. Maybe Eclipse has it, but I didn't see it. So we have my LD-Ping library, which I use, the Android manifest. This is a C# assembly information. It holds, your version numbers. I'm assembly version 100. I have a title and a copyright. I don't have a company or all of that. This is my web reference that connects to my LANDesk Core server. These are all my activities. I have one array adapter. I don't have any assets. I think this would be, I'm not sure what I would put in the assets, maybe some special buttons or objects that I could use. It creates this folder by default, and I don't need it, so I didn't use it. In my business logic, I have a core object which stores my credentials and does authenticating to the LANDesk message-based SDK or MBSDK. And I can initialize services, and I instantiate an MBSDK object. This IP address class is just kind of a little not pertinent to really Android development or anything. We pad our IP addresses, so 192.168.0.1, becomes 192.168.000.001. They pad it with zeros so that it sorts as a string, which makes sense when sorting is a string, but not any other time. And this is just a little piece of code that I already had written in C# to unpad, remove the extra zeros. And so I was able to just copy and paste this object right in and use that. So that's one of the benefits of using Mono, is when you work for a company that's all C#, you can continue writing in C# and reuse code. Shared preferences is an object I use to write and commit. It's very similar to how you share stuff. We did we had this in a class where we saved data to the actual phone or tablet and pulled that data. And so hopefully I've explained everything about my application and how it works. I'm going to go ahead and end the screencast now. Thank you.